Hello, everybody. It's another Friday Night Photoshop, and this is a very special night, just like last week's. It's the Processing Skills Part 2, the results. We're going to look at what you did with the images. And tonight, the table's turned around. You're the star of the show. You get to tell me and everybody what you did to the image, and specifically, what were you thinking when you did what you did to the image? So let's just dive right in, shall we? Now, everybody had a maker number. This was my maker number, which was 0, and this was my image. And we talked about this last time. This is the woodpecker that I darkened the background, and I made the woodpecker a little bit brighter. So let's go see what this person did.
What I did was to do masks for the tree and the woodpecker, and then was able to handle them separately so that I could brighten the tree and make it a little bit wider without the woodpecker burning out, and then blurred the background.
Yeah, I see the background's nicely blurred, and it's a nice contrast too. I kind of enjoy what you've done with this. So thank you. Here is processor number 1.
That's me. This is George. I decided I was going to flip this one to the side and blow it up so that the woodpecker came a little larger. I lightened up the trunk of the tree, got some more brightness out of that, and also darkened the background. But I when I was playing around with the image, I really liked the idea of flipping this woodpecker on the side. It just looks like a branch on the tree, and him there, he's eating some of his bugs, I guess, that are on the tree. But I also like that little bit of light between his beak.
Oh, okay.
I like that spot there. I say, hey, there's a little bit of light there. And I got a little bit of brightness in his eye.
Yeah, nice catch light there in the eye. You're right. Number 2. Who was number 2?
I am. This
Okay.
is mine. I lightened up the woodpecker. The burned out leaves over on the lower right hand side bothered me, so I got rid of them, darkened the background a bit. And if I were going to play with this a little bit more, I'd work on the other leaves. I tried to darken them, but I'm not real happy with how that worked. But yeah, that's basically what I did.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, we didn't have 3 or 4 or 5, so here's number 6.
That would be me.
Go ahead, Pat.
Okay. First in Camera Raw, I selected the bird and dehazed him, increased his texture, some detail, and some saturation. And then I did a separate mask for the tree trunk and did essentially the same with that, brought up some whites and dehazed it. Also used an adaptive, quote, glow preset on the bird, which I thought made him pop a little bit. And then I inverted both the, I combined the bird and tree in one mask and inverted it and dehazed the background and slightly desaturated it for muted color, decreased the highlights, used some curves, and then I took it into Photoshop itself and I used the clone tool to remove, there was a large bokeh dot there. I added a pale green fill layer because there were still some areas that were quite white, and I was able with opacity to just eliminate them, and it was the same color green. And then I ended up back in Camera Raw and chose a bokeh landscape neutral filter, which was disguised some of the clone circles in the upper left. And then I selected the tree trunk and increased the texture and decreased the highlights in that in Lightroom.
Wow. About how long did you invest in this image?
At least a half an hour or more.
Wow. That's certainly a lot of work.
I wanted to use as many tools as you had taught us as I could.
Okay. I guess it's a good thing I didn't teach anybody about how to use hammers because they probably if they got frustrated, they may not be on board with us tonight. Their computer might be in bad shape. Thank you. Here's number 7. Who's processor 7?
Betty.
So Betty, you are up.
All right. Well, I cropped it.
Hmm.
As you can see, I cropped it tight. I didn't like the light from the right side of the tree. So I kind of cropped it and blended it in. Took it into raw and well, that's where I cropped it. Made a mask, painted in the bird so that I could lighten it up. And then I did texture and clarity to it. I took back into Photoshop, zoomed in just on the eyes and did levels, brightened up the eyes and sharpened the eyes a little bit.
Yep.
Went back into raw did exposure and lightened it up a little bit more. Texture, clarity, and dehazed. Did content aware on the tree, like I said, and recropped it 16 by 9.
Very nice.
Thank you.
It looks very sharp. It looks nice. Number 9.
That's me, Colleen.
Okay.
So I did similar things with this workflow. I opened it in RAW and cropped it first, and then I applied the Topaz AI just to sharpen it and denoise it a bit. And then after that, I copied the layer and darkened the background and brightened the bird.
Mhm.
And then I cleaned up the edges with the healing brush and then resized it and put a stroke around it.
Very nice. All right. So for these next images, that first one was mine. So going forward, I would invite the maker of the image to ask any questions of the processor to get any information or to give some feedback if you're interested in doing that. So this was image number 2, and I'd processed this one, and I liked the singularity of this one. You know, it's kind of funny looking at it real quickly. It almost looked a little like a mushroom, but I really like the colors in this, and I like the fact that there was that little bug, that little beetle on it. And I remember I darkened the edges on it. So let's move on to processor number 1, and let's hear what you did.
That's George, and this is my image. I also, well, as soon as I sent it in, I knew this one flower was going to be the star of the attraction here. And I've certainly I cropped it in and darkened the background, and I lightened the 3 greener leaves on the bottom so that you could really see the texture in them, and brought out a little bit more of that yellow in the middle on the flower itself. And I used that color to put the border on, to put the stroke on it, and brought out some details and straightened it up a little bit too. So it was the flower itself was more vertical, and the yellow part of the flower was more vertical, even though the stem is a little slanted there. But I really like the way this popped off the dark background.
It looks really nice, George.
Thank you.
So let's go see what some other people did with it. Maker processor, I should say, number 2.
This is me. I actually like the 3 flowers. And although the one was way off to the left, I used the content aware move to put it where I wanted it. And then I did the texture, the clarity, the exposure a bit. And I cropped it, used a healing brush on whatever looked like it needed it. Put the vignette and the stroke.
I really like the way you moved the flower.
Yeah, I'd never done it before, so I thought it worked pretty well. I will definitely do it again. Yeah.
Okay. This was processor number 5.
What I did was to duplicate the flower on the right and make it smaller, and then took the 4th flower and moved it over, and again try to blur it and make it smaller. Dehazed and back, and try to make it not as bright as an image, but to give it a sense of position or location in a lily pad.
Sure.
Very nice.
All right.
Well, that really pops.
Yeah.
That's mine. And I wanted to see what I could do with the two. So I moved the one and using the, content aware move tool. And that was the first time I'd been fairly successful with it. I cropped and I cloned out the edging of the moved flower because there was still some remnants around it. And then I masked both of the flowers and using mask the subject, it did pick up both of them. And I used a gradient on the top to decrease some clarity and texture to increase the unfocused background. And I chose a light fall preset and I used color grading this time and decreased some shadows, increased midtones, luminance, noise reduction. And I used a bottom gradient to darken the foreground. And then I masked the flowers to increase the whites and the textures and went back into Lightroom and I used a brush and painted in the lily leaf petal textures, slightly desaturated the background and added the light vignette and framed it or resized it and framed it.
Very nice.
Yeah, very nice.
Thank you.
Number 7.
Yeah, this is Betty. I did texture and color, clarity rather to it. Then I did a vignette. And then I did a linear gradient and I did it from the bottom. Did some spot healing. I used a puppet wrap to distort and open the flower on the right-hand side.
Oh, cool.
Did shadows and highlights and sharpen.
I think it's interesting to see how all the different tools that people use.
That's what
I
I
would never
enjoy
have
about
thought of
this.
a puppet wrap. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting to use. Took me a few times.
No, that's what I like about this exercise, and we'll have some more comments a little later. Let's look at the last maker here.
That would be me. So I opened this up in RAW and then I cut out the middle. If you remember, there was more open space there. So I cut out the middle of the free space and free transformed it and brought it together and then healed it and used patch on it. Then made adjustments on the color and the texture and the noise. And then I made a custom vignette with the radial gradient and then resized it and put a stroke on it.
Excellent.
Very nice.
You all did
Very nice.
great work with it.
Thank you.
Okay, George, what do you think?
They all did great work with it. Very nice.
Now, the question is, did you get any ideas for what you might want to do with this?
Oh, I mean, that opening that flower up with the puppet
Warp, yeah.
warp and yeah, that was really nice. And and I like just what Colleen did here by pulling out the middle of it. And I was thinking about that myself at one time on one of these images. And I said, well, now what tool was that? And I couldn't figure it out. So yeah, no, that's very nice.
That's great. All right, here is the next image. And this is the one that I did, where I felt removing the house from the scene because it really didn't help tell the story. And looking at this now, I'm noticing there's this box over here that probably doesn't need to be there. And I see the house through the trees here, but that doesn't bother me quite as much. I still say I wish that there would be a way that I could just walk a little bit over to the left here to see a little more of the boat. But that said, like I say, sometimes we're given this given set. This is all we have to work with, and we have to make the most of it. So this was my interpretation. Here is what maker number 1 did with it.
That was mine. And one thing I tried to do a little different here is I tried to light all the lights on the tree
Oh, yeah.
by cloning them, but it didn't come quite as bright as I had hoped to. I think as I went through and I changed some other things after I brightened the lights, that it might have toned them back down again. And I had a lot of trouble getting rid of that house that you got rid of, Mike. And I didn't even think about the box because I spent so much time on the house.
That happens.
Didn't know what else to do with it. It's a very busy image, but I have to, it's a great, great image from the standpoint of them using all these lobster traps and buoys and such to make this tree out of it. And yeah, I did darken the sky so that I was hoping to bring the tree out more without focusing on the trees in the background.
Hmm. Okay, very good.
I think this is mine.
Okay.
And this is also my image. And the boat is still there. The lobster tree is gone, but the boat is still sitting right there. I straightened it and cropped it. Got rid of the house. I used a content aware move and a clone stamp tool to get rid of the house. I played with the color a bit and put a vignette on it. And then I was just looking around, and one of the filters, I think it was render, said frame. And I thought, oh, what's this? And I thought, I wonder if they have snowflakes. And well, they did. And I couldn't resist.
Okay.
And then I put the stroke around to match some of the red in the tree. And I think I was playing with this, whether this is, yeah, I actually took the focus down a little bit. And one of them, it was so focused. And I liked it better, a little fuzzy.
A little softer. Okay.
Yeah, and that was it.
Okay. Let's go to the next one, and feel free to give feedback to the processor. This one also came in as number 2. I don't know whose it was.
No.
If nobody's going to take credit for it, then I'll just move on. So here's number 4.
I had, let me see, I had trouble with this one of getting it to work with making the lobster, the red in the buoys red rather than pink. I just really I wasn't real creative with it, and I pretty much followed what you had done with yours.
That's fine.
So
I noticed everybody took the house out on the right, which I find fascinating. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, to see if anybody else would have done it on their own.
House had to go.
Yeah, I think that's what somebody said the last time, and I think you're right.
I left the house because I thought it balanced the image.
I think this might be number 5. It came in as 2.
It's mine, Bob. I agreed with your comment that the focus of the picture was really the boat rather than the Christmas tree. And so I tried to emphasize the boat, make it a little bit stronger color in the blue, purple, and only a small part of the Christmas tree and buoys, and sort of welcoming it back to Christmas.
That's good.
I
Yeah,
like it.
It's interesting that, yeah, just to see the boat that, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like it too.
Number 6.
That's me. And Sharon, you gave me fits. So the look I was going for was more a sketchy, artistic kind of a look. And in fact, I worked this up, I think, twice before I settled on something. I selected the tree first, sharpened it, dehazed it, increased the temperature slightly, and selected the boat after that and increased the saturation and the temperature, vibrance, all that. I took it into Photoshop, and then that's where I patched out the house, and I finished the spot the house was in with clone and burn tools, and then I cropped it and resized it back into Camera Raw, and I used a gradient tool to cool the sky to give it a little bit of color. I tried coloring the buoys, and I just couldn't really get rid of the pink. I tried Mike's trick and I couldn't. I also cloned out the trails and the snow, so it was all kind of all snow and no paths going through it. Then I added an icy white preset to make it look like winter. And at one point I had put a star on the top but decided I didn't like it.
Hmm.
And I did add some snow from another preset. And then I added the stroke and a little bit of a white grainy inner shadow. And that's how I did it.
I really like this interpretation. It really is a artistic. It does look a little like a like a drawing.
Like a
And,
watercolor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, very nice.
Thank you.
very nicely done.
Yeah.
Okay, and Colleen made this one.
I did. I've already mentioned the house. So I did this first after I cropped it and did something called optic correct on it.
Hmm.
I applied a Adobe filter called Adobe Vivid.
Hmm.
That's why the colors kind of give that vibrating, I thought, vibrating color. And then I went back in and copied layers a couple of times and dropped back the brightness and selected the tree and the boat, brightened the snow. And then George, the way I brightened all the bulbs was to brush over them. I took the color picker and I picked out the gold. And then I applied that with the brush with each dark one. So if you just made it lighter, it didn't really bring it out. But when you added a little tint, a little gold color to it, it did. And so then I resized it after.
Nice, nice.
Wow.
Nicely done. Very
Thank you.
good.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, we move on to the next image, and this came from Linda down in Florida. And this is one that I had worked on initially. And I remember thinking how we read from left to right, that I think I swapped the boat around.
Hmm.
You
Let's
did.
go see what other people did. Number one.
This is mine, and I put it in the vertical. I think it's 16 by 9, and I really wanted the water in front of it to show how far out they were.
Oh, good idea.
And I cut down the sky a little bit from the standpoint when I cropped a little bit of the sky out, and then I selected the sky and adjusted the color in the sky, and I took out that little blip in the water there that was that watermark or something that was on the screen, and that's about all. But I really like this vertical image too, from the standpoint of it looks like the water just draws you out to the boat.
Hmm.
No, I like that too. I think choosing the view of the wall does draw you in.
Processor number two came up with.
This is mine. All right, I straightened it and cropped it, and then I played with the exposure a bit. And then I selected the boat and lightened the hull of the boat, put the vignette and the stroke around it. That was it. As I look at it, sometimes the color looks a little bit too intense. I think if I were going to work on this more, I would take the color down a bit.
Okay. And Linda processed her own. And so this is her interpretation. You want to talk about this, Linda?
Well, I must make apologies to everybody else that's ahead of me. I'm a beginner and I had extreme difficulty with, I know what all the icons are, but I couldn't get them to do what I wanted. So I just cheated a little bit and just used the easy ones. And it's not, I wanted to change some stuff, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I'm
That's okay.
thankful that I was included in this because now I have the incentive to learn and apply it.
We all had to start somewhere. And I think everybody on this call will tell you that they've all been in your shoes. So you should be congratulated for even throwing your hat in the ring and for participating, because it can be a little daunting. I'll be the first to admit. And the fact that you did it, it's only, to me, means brighter pastures ahead for you. And it's just going to get better. I do like how this is silhouetted, and the way the sun peeks through, that looks pretty nice. Let's go see what this person thought.
I did basic adjustments in Adobe Camera Raw, and then I brought it into Photoshop and I cropped it and I took out the watermark and I lightened the strip on the boat. And I think looking at this on your monitor it looks darker than it did on my monitor. And I think my monitor might not be adjusted correctly.
Okay.
That's what I did.
Okay.
No, I think in all of them so far that I've seen, the scene itself was so bright and cloudy and dark. And I think that's what I liked about it. And was lucky enough to get it in the right position of the sun. That wasn't planned.
Okay, this I think might be Rob.
Yeah, that's mine. And it didn't work quite the way I wanted, but I was trying to emphasize the sunlight on the water. So I try to isolate the yellow and have that come through. I reconstructed the sails to get rid of the brightest sun in the middle, which I thought was distracting, and made the sky a little bit bluer and the water a little bit darker.
Pretty.
Very nice.
Number 6.
That was my attempt. I found this one a challenge also. I tried a vertical crop and I couldn't make it work. So I cropped it to size in Lightroom and worked on the highlights and saturation and the shadows and the vibrance. And then in Photoshop, I cloned out that spot, and in Camera Raw, I selected the sky and I increased the magenta and denoised it, but I kept the rings in because I thought the color rings definitely went with this starburst or the sunburst, which was in a preset that I had. And I used a brush to increase the saturation of the gold color in the water. And I added the sun and a filter called Glow on one.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so that's what I did. I wished I were on the sailboat. Oh, I also selected the boat and colored and lightened the hull.
Seems like a lot of people did that. Number 7.
Hi there. Well, had it in raw, I think, and then I cropped it. I did exposure and contrast. I did highlight and texture, clarity and dehaze. And I took it back into Photoshop, did Control J. And anyways, what else did I did curves on it. I did linear radius on it, dehaze again. I think I painted the boat a little browner, the bottom hull, part of the hull. And I cleaned up a few things that were in there.
Yeah, I see the flag. I didn't see that before.
Number 9, Colleen.
Yes, so I wanted to make sure I got the sky clean because there was a lot of banding and stuff in here. So I went in and I did color hue optics and I used a blue calibration on it. And that deepened everything. And then I used something called the modern filter number 4 in the Photoshop filters. And then I opened up another layer and I made a light path and colorized it. So I picked up that color and then just, worked with the opacity to get it just right on the water. And then I did a linear burn on that. And then I merged the visibles. And then I used some brushes to correct some spots and finish it up to get a little bit of that blur and noise out with some Topaz AI. And then stroke and resize.
I like that, Colleen.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's
I
really
like
pretty.
it. Uh-huh.
Very nice.
Okay, I think we move on to another image. And this is the one that came in with 3 vessels. And I remember saying, well, I think I just would like to go with 2. And I remember I had to do some work to get the hull to be the color that I wanted. And it was kind of purple at the time. And so this was what I had come up with. And processor number 1.
Okay, this is George again.
Yep.
And, people, I've heard so many times that odd numbers are more interesting than even numbers. So I decided to leave all 3 boats in.
Okay.
And I really worked on the sky somewhat and a little bit on the hull so that the back of the hulls would show a little bit brighter on the 2 boats on the left. I wanted to get a little bit more lightness there. I didn't I didn't brighten them all up because I didn't think the light was shining that far to brighten up the entire holes on those. And I think I might have straightened it out a little bit. And I toyed with that pole over there on the left, and then I realized the shadow was in the water. So I said, nope, I think I'll leave that pole in. It's on the land out there. But this is a very nice image. I liked it very much.
Nice.
Number 2.
Who took that one?
Sarah.
This looks like mine, but mine looked a lot pinker on my monitor. Yeah, I took a lot of the color out of it. I was playing around with the adjustments and the dehaze. I slid it all the way to the left and thought, oh, I like that. You know, it's a very calm image to start with. And I like the softer colors with it. My monitor, it looked a lot more pink than this. I'm not sure why it looked so blue. And then I cropped it and put the vignette and the stroke around it. And quit. Liked it.
I like it. It's pretty.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Number 3.
Well, that's me again. I really didn't do much other than crop it and play with some of the lighting. That was just adjustments. And I just like the scene and the colors in it. It's a pretty picture.
Number 4.
All right, this is mine, and I decided that I really liked having the 3 boats in the picture, and I liked seeing the reflection in the water of the masts. I used vivid colors in Adobe Camera Raw, and then I tweaked it some. Let's see, I liked the breakwater and the shore on either side so that it just sort of surrounded it. And that's about all I did. I sharpened it a lot.
Yeah, I
That's
can
it.
see there's a lot of detail in there.
Yep.
All right.
Ooh.
Ooh,
Oh, I
Interesting.
like that.
that's
Yeah.
nice.
This is mine, obviously cropped in the 2 boats. I used one of the preformed skies in replacement in Photoshop, and then tried to adjust the water to reflect the sky less so in the front by having a gradient, a little more blue, and lighten the sides of the boats so that they're not quite as dark.
A very different look.
Yeah,
Almost look
very
like
different.
metal holes on the boats.
Very dramatic. I like it.
Yeah, that's nicely done.
This is mine, and I really liked this image, so I didn't do a whole lot with it. I also liked the idea of the 3 boats, the 3 sailboats, and I liked the mast reflections. And I tried several different crops, and I just ended up with this one. And I just selected out the sky, tweaked the colors a bit, and then selected each of the hulls and increased the exposure. I used a classic dawn preset, which really popped the colors. And then that was in Camera Raw, and then I went to Photoshop and resized it and added the stroke. But I really did like this image.
Pretty.
Number 7.
I kind of played around a bit.
I guess, wow.
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to make 4 boats. To kind of bring in, I used contact aware, and I moved that boat, copied it and moved it over, kind of played around with it a bit. And then I did a gradient linear. Can't remember if I did it on the top or the bottom. No, I got it the way I wrote it down. Did dehaze. I did curves. I guess I did it to the top. Then I moved temperature and tint, texture and clarity. Framed it a little bit, and then I'm not sure how I got I figured it out afterwards when I put the stroke in the first time. It was forget what that setting's called, but as you see, it's kind of dusty looking.
Oh, yeah.
Then I figured out how to fix. I says, "Oh fudge, I got to fix this." And then I says, "Well, I kind of like it." And then I put another stroke around it. Anyway, that's how it came out.
Okay, and finally, Colleen.
So I lost my notes on this, but I can recall how I did it. So I wanted 3 boats also. So I just took out some of the negative space by just making a big rectangle in that and bringing them together. so
Hmm.
that there was less of a gap. So they didn't seem like there was a laggard in that third one, and then made sure the horizons all matched. I thought it looked more dramatic as a silhouette, so I worked on getting that, deepening, the exposures on that, and then pulling up the vibrance, and worked a little, I think, on getting the noise and banding out of the sky. And that I thought made a nice contrast, the silhouette against the color.
It does.
It does. Nice.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Okay, we go to another image now, and I think this was from Bob, if I remember right. And
Correct.
this was my interpretation. I thought it was a little bit whimsical to see his friend in the shot, and that was one that I think that his friend will probably enjoy if you made a print for him to take.
Did.
Yep, I think he'll enjoy that. Now let's go see what everyone else thought, and this is certainly interesting.
This is George, and I
Is
saw
it,
when you brighten those eyes up, I said, well, he's looking right down below him, and that's where the guy should be standing.
oh,
So
okay.
I picked him up and I moved him over. Now, I didn't get a good job of fixing his leg, the statue's leg there. Some of those pieces are a little cruddy. I could have spent more time on that, but I guess that day I was working on it, I didn't. But I really laughed when I saw the look on the statue's face, looking down at the guy standing there, looking right at him now. So it was whimsical, yes. I darkened the sky a little bit on it as well. And I didn't have any problem with the sign. I just thought, oh, that's okay over there. It's just a whimsical. So I didn't move the sign. I just left it there.
All right, nicely done. Number 2.
This is mine. I adjusted the white balance, took the highlights down a bit, texture, the clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and I used the magnetic lasso tool on the eyes and then levels to bring out the pupils in his eyes.
Oh yeah.
And then I looked at it and I couldn't decide whether it was about the troll or about the friend. And finally I decided it was about the friend. So I blurred the troll a bit just to emphasize the friend. And I looked at it and the troll was looking one way and the friend was over the other way. So I did the same thing George did. I picked him up and moved him so that the troll is looking at the friend now. And then I cropped it. The hands and the hair all lead my eye right off the edge of the picture. So I cropped them out. And then I did the vignette and the stroke. That was it.
Nice crop.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Ooh, I like that.
Ooh,
This is mine. I darkened the background. This is the first time I tried the Photoshop, one of their painting filters, and I liked the outcome. Cleaned it up a little bit, and then brought the friend to the front by
nice.
doing a mask, black mask, and then cutting through it.
I like it.
Yeah, certainly a different approach.
Yeah.
Yes.
Number 6.
This is mine, and this was a real fun image. I really like this image. I tried moving the photographer and was not successful, so I left him there. I tweaked the color a little bit in Lightroom, and then I took it into Photoshop and used a brush to darken the background, and then sent it to Camera Raw, and I selected the troll by brush because it didn't do a good job selecting it. And I decreased the exposure and the highlights and the whites. And I increased the contrast and the temperature a little bit because I really wanted to see the grain in the wood. I think that troll is fascinating. I used some curves. I created a mask for each eye and lightened them. And I selected the photographer separately and I increased the shadows. And then I combined the masks for the photographer and the troll and inverted it to work on the background, where I decreased the texture and the clarity to make it a bit out of focus and less prominent. I used curves to try and further separate the troll from the background. And then in Photoshop, I painted the foreground a bit darker on a separate layer and just played with the opacity. And then I resized it, added the stroke and the inner shadow, which I had the inner shadow thicker at the bottom.
Now, Bob may not ask this question, but I will. What time investment do you have in this image?
At least a half an hour, probably.
Half hour, okay.
Yep.
No, I'm just curious.
At
All right.
least, because I'm still not, I would experiment with something, didn't like it. Sometimes I would start over. So I learned a lot of things that didn't work.
There's value in that.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Number 7.
It's me, Betty. I really didn't I liked the photograph as it was. And then the only thing that I saw that I really needed to do was to make sure his eyes stood out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much what I did. I used the lasso too, and I lightened them up, did some clarity, dehazing to them. But the total photograph, I pretty much didn't do a lot. I did do a stroke. It doesn't show up very good. And I think that's before I figured out how to make the stroke be solid instead of sandy looking. Took me a while to figure that one out. I don't know why, but it did. But that's about all I did.
Okay. And finally, Colleen's version.
Well, I experimented with a few different crops to see what I wanted to do. And you know me, I like portraits. So I decided to make the portrait of the troll. And then I proceeded to use the radial gradient to pop up the eyes and some linear gradients to enhance the light and shadow on the face the way you would in a studio. And just tried to emphasize the texture in the hair and separate it from the trees. And that was pretty much it. Little saturation.
I like
Very,
the way
very
you can
nice.
see how it was made out of branches or twigs.
All right, let's move on to the next image. This is the view from, was this down at Nubble Light?
No, it was Marginal Way in Ogunquit.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So this is my interpretation. I remember I had to do some work to get the rocks to be a little more colorful, and also I had to do some cleanup behind the bench. And I remember saying there was some details to be had in the sky, and by doing the gradient, I was able to bring that out. You can see all the things that I did in the replay of this processing part 1. So let's go to the first maker and let's hear what you did to this.
This is my interpretation of it. And I kept looking at that bench and I said, there should be somebody sitting there, but there wasn't. And I'm thinking to myself, if I walked around to the other side of that bench, it might say, in memory of John Smith, who used to sit here and watch the ocean. So I decided it was maybe a little bit on the sadder side, and I darkened the sky on it, and I brought out the texture of the sky that way. And then I lightened up some of the stones and got rid of the pieces of wood or the other bench that was behind, corner of the bench that was behind it, by cloning in some stones. And I lightened up a little bit on the darker stones that looked like there were wetter stones out there. I lightened those up a little bit too. Then of course I put the border around, the stroke around it. And that's about what I did with this one. I thought it was a very nice image, and I just thought I'd take the darker look on the sky rather than the brighter.
And that's the way it looked that day, George. And you did a really good job getting that other piece of bench out of there.
Well, thank you. Took me a while.
Number 2.
This is mine, and I upped the texture, white balance, the clarity, and the dehaze. I think I used on the sky. I selected the rocks and brought the rocks in the middle ground up so you can see them a little better. I used the healing brush around, and then the magic lasso to get rid of the bench in the back, and then I darkened it a little bit with the levels and put the vignette and the stroke around it. It's a very small stroke, but I think it works. My theory is if the first thing you notice is the stroke, then you haven't done it right.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It looks fine.
Thank you.
Number 3, Linda.
Hmm.
I was going for the black and white, but I didn't know how to use some of the other tools to work on the areas that I wanted it to be dark. So that was my attempt to make it black and white. But I didn't know how to highlight different things.
Well, you've got to start, Linda. That's
Okay.
a good start, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying black and white. I'm kind of drawn toward black and white. Sometimes it looks good with a picture, sometimes it doesn't, but
All right. Number 4.
This is mine, and I can't exactly remember what I did. I don't see my notes. I did use a linear gradient in the sky, and I cloned out the debris in front of the bench. I tried to make the rocks in the foreground a little pinker. And I also spent some time working on the rocks in the center close to the water. And that's about it.
Very nice.
Yep.
Bob?
When I looked at the image, I liked it, but it didn't seem very warm for time at all. And so I used sky replacement, and then at that point needed to adjust the color in the rocks. I eliminated the bench by cropping around it. The one thing I couldn't figure out how to do is to get the reflection off the ocean, not as white as it is,
Looks
Hmm.
good.
but stands out more than I'd like.
But I like it because that's the color the foam is on the ocean.
Yep.
I don't think it detracts from it.
It's certainly a different interpretation, and that's really what this whole exercise brings out. It's fun to see.
Mhm.
Here's number 6.
So this is mine. I had a harder time doing this the second time than I did the first time. I patched out that piece of bench and I used the clone stamp to rebuild the rocks under the bench. And I used sky replacement on this one. And I chose this one because it matched the day, the drab day, and it added a little drama. I used a brush to bring out the clouds and warmed it up a little. Then I scaled it and I flipped it to better match what the ocean looked like. And I did all of that in Photoshop, and then in Camera Raw, I selected each of the following. So I had so many masks going: the bench, the rock platform that it was on, the bush, various groups of rocks and water. And for each one, it was different degrees of increasing or decreasing highlights, saturation, and the temperature. And then for the entire image, I used the color grading again to increase the saturation and highlights of the midtones. Then I added a slight vignette.
Nice. Looks very nice.
Thank you.
Number 7.
Ooh,
This is Betty. I had fun with this one. I cropped it in raw, did levels. I did linear gradient to it down to the rocks. I dehazed it, did curves in raw. Then I got out of it, and then I went back in and did linear gradient to the bottom half. Got the colors that I wanted and the depth that I wanted, I guess. Moved the temperature over and tint, move haze over. And then I did texture, clarity, a little bit of dehazing, sharpening, and vignette.
I like that you could see the horizon.
Mhm.
Well, that was something I wanted to make sure that got in there, the separation.
You certainly brought out some different colors in the rocks.
mhm.
Mhm.
I love that gradient tool. It really is neat. Thank you, Mike, for showing us so many tricks.
Here's number 9, Colleen, and you took it to black and white as well.
I did, and I was thinking, for some reason, infrared. I don't know why, that this image was so moody, and I thought infrared had been a nice way to approach it. So that's why I have that. I was trying to make that infrared white. You know how they make makes black look white and white look black kind of thing, but also capture, that moody sky and that horizon. So that was kind of what I was going for. So I worked on textures and I worked on various tones to get it to this point. So you could interpret that as snow also, but that's what I was thinking of when I was doing the image.
Interesting how just about everybody cleaned up behind the bench.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really needed to be done. Let's move on to the next image. This came from Betty, if I remember right.
Yeah,
And this was a real challenge. It came to us as a Photoshop file, which doesn't give us a whole lot of latitude. It's not like a raw file that we could have gone into to get some more detail. So I remember having to use some blend modes to try and tone down the white almost overexposure in this, and having to do some coloring to make what I've got here. So let's see what other people did. Number 1, go for it.
This is George. This is what I did after about an hour and a half on this, Betty.
I'm sorry.
I couldn't get anything to work on this, but I finally wound up with this image, which I really can't explain. I did take the thumb off the hand though, so it's not an AI image. It's really what I did to it. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
But when in the end, I just liked the colors and the shape on it, and I said, "Well, that's what I'm submitting."
You did
I
good.
can't tell you how I got here. It was so long, it took me so long to do it.
You did good.
So Photoshop becomes photo surgery.
Here's number 2.
Okay, this is mine. And I had trouble with the burned out pieces on the hand and the thumb as well. I liked some of the shadows. I left more of the original image there. I liked some of the shadows in the and the light source. What I did with the hand was I selected the hand, turned the whole thing to black and white because the background doesn't care, and then put a tint on the black and white. And that seemed to take care of some of the burned out images. I think if I would work on the tint on the hand, it looks a little too green here. And then I put the vignette and the stroke and called it good.
I like it. You got this. You got the rays of the sun, and that was my biggest thing, is that I wanted to get the sun rays.
Yeah,
Well, you did well.
thank you.
Number 4.
Well, I had a hard time with this. I really couldn't get the colors to look like flesh colors. So then I thought, well, I'll use the burn tool and bring down some of the real highlights. And then I took it into black and white. And then I made a selection of the hand and put it on a different or I cropped it and put it on a different background, a gray. I just went and opened up a new file. And I rotated it a bit and put a stroke around it, sized it to 16 by 9.
Interesting.
I
Pretty
like
good.
the way your stroke didn't cover the hand. The hand's in front of the stroke.
I guess that's because the hand was added and
After.
it was on a different layer or something.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting.
I think it works.
Yeah,
Work.
it does. It
Yeah,
does.
does.
Thanks.
Ooh,
Number-
that's pretty.
Number 5, I guess.
Yeah, I struggled with this also. Ended up figuring to try to create something duplicate with the hand on the bottom a little bit smaller. And then I couldn't get the skin to work, so I used the texture on the skin on both of them and try to increase the contrast.
That's a good idea.
I like it. Very nice.
Yeah.
Number 6.
Yep, this is mine. I also had a hard time, and I started working on this one first, and then I just had to leave it and worked on the others and came back to this last. I tried to keep in mind what Betty said, that she saw this and liked it because of the way the light hit the hand and the particles that were in the light. So in Photoshop, I resized the image and I converted it to black and white using the custom filter option as opposed to just selecting a black and white preset. I then went into the neural filters,
No,
and there's a cool filter there that I just discovered called depth blur.
Hmm.
And I tried that to see what it would do, and it was exactly what I wanted it to do. It did not totally obscure the background, but and it didn't affect the hand. And then I went back into Photoshop and used the clone stamp tool to remove a stray shadow that was under the hand. And then in Lightroom Classic, I selected the subject, which was the hand and the jacket. I duplicated and inverted it later to work on the background. I added grain to simulate the particles that Betty saw.
yeah,
And then using a brush, I dodged the thumb, the palm, and the edges of the jacket or the fleece. And then was a nifty preset called Depth of Field Extra Lights.
mhm.
And that just emphasized the light source. And then I burned a slight shadow underneath the hand. And then the vignette was part of that preset. So
Very nice. I
thank
like
you,
it.
Betty.
I like how you got the light coming through the windows and you can almost see the particles.
I'm really glad I asked you why you liked that image, because that really helped me go ahead and process it.
Did a good job.
Number 7.
That's me.
Ooh,
This was
Yeah. I like.
this was so hard. I can't tell you how much time I got into it. And I know this is my own photograph. I wished when I had taken the photograph that I'd had the forethought to tell my grandson to move his hand more towards me, and I didn't. So I cropped this. Then what did I do? I cropped it in RAW and did texture clarity and dehaze to it. Then I took it into Photoshop and what was that called? Free transform, and then what it's called? Distort. And it took me forever to remember how to do this. And I know how to do it, but I have forgotten because I haven't been able to work on the computer much in the past few years because of my back and my arms. Anyways, I finally figured out how to distort and turn his hand ever so slightly towards where I was taking the shot. And it took me longer than it should have. Then I turned it black and white, but I wanted, in cropping it the way I did, I lost my haze, the sun rays, and I really wanted that. And I called up a friend of mine and she couldn't explain how to put sun rays back in either. So I went online to YouTube and watched a YouTube video that had a little bit to do with what I was doing, but not. I couldn't tell you again how I did this to save my neck. It was complicated, and I couldn't really spot the places where there was light to bring into the hand because there wasn't any. So I took half of his directions and couldn't use the other half. I was lucky. That's all I can tell you. This is how it came out, and I loved it.
Yeah.
Except I kind of wish that I had darkened the orb that I have over to the right some more. What do you think, Mike? Should I darken that more or left it the way it is?
The one on the right, upper right?
Yeah, upper right-hand corner, the biggest. Right.
That's okay. That one's okay. If anything, the one that I don't know if I'm fond of is in the lower left-hand corner.
Oh, the light one?
Yeah, the semicircle and
Yeah,
it looks like a bubble.
It looks like a bubble. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it kind of does. But that's what I got, and like I said, I was trying to get rays. I got some rays, but it's different. It's different. But I also painted and then did opacity on the fingertips so that I could get them. They weren't quite so bright also. But I liked what I ended up getting. It's
Did
different.
you work from the file that you gave to everybody, or is this from a raw file?
This is a raw file. You told me to go back and get to find the raw file, so I did. It took me a while, but I finally.
Okay.
Yeah,
You see, we didn't have that option.
I know. I'm very sorry because I really thought I sent you a raw file.
Yeah.
But remember, that's when the updates came, and I couldn't see nothing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was picking. I say, is this the photograph? I couldn't see nothing. So I'm sorry. I apologize, everybody.
No worries. No worries.
I like what you did.
Well, thank you. I like it. I think it's pretty neat.
Let's look at another version. This comes from Colleen.
So I looked at this a few times and it occurred to me that the biggest problem with this image for me to try to solve was I guess you wouldn't call it exactly high dynamic range. It was more about the variation in what is known as value
Yeah.
in the color. So I had purchased a few months ago some Joel Grimes brushes. And this was the first opportunity I'd had to really put them to use. And so that's how I got the ray effect in the background, which helped to get a little more solidity around that hand. So I obviously toned it down a little. I tried to correct some of the really highlighted areas, except that thumb. I decided that it just wasn't worth the effort, and put some shadow in under the fingers. And so that's where I left it.
Yeah. Nice. You did a good job.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Okay, I think we have a new image to look at. This comes from Ron, who is located in Tennessee, and I don't think he's with us tonight. We're just going to look at this image, and hopefully he'll get a chance to watch the replay. We all saw what I did with this one last week, so let's just move right on to processor number 1.
All right, this is George. It's my processing on it. And again, trying to pull out more of the colors in the trees. And as I was working through this, I had too much green in the grass and I played it down a little bit, but now I look at it and I have too much yellow in the grass in the front. I'd probably want to replay that again. But I also brought out some of the red, as you did, Mike, in the barn, and bring out more color on that. I guess it's ivy or whatever's growing over the barn. And then I lightened up the entrance to the barn, so it just gives it more of a focal point there, I think. You know, trying to straighten it out and give it a nice long look. So I'm not sure if this is finally a 16:9 or not. I played around with a couple of different sizes on it.
Mm-hmm.
But playing mostly with the color, maybe a little bit with the dehaze a little bit too. I think I used that. I guess now that I'm looking at it, the only disappointing thing I have is I got a little bit too much yellow in that grass. But otherwise, I liked it. Like it a lot. It's a beautiful shot, beautiful photograph.
Yeah, it is a nice scene. It certainly is about the color.
Right.
Here's number 2.
Okay, this is mine. I cropped it and then I played with the contrast, the texture, clarity, and a dehaze. I wasn't so interested in making the color on the trees pop as much because I thought the barn was more of the focus and the trees were more of a backdrop. And the trees don't always get really bright. Some years they're pretty. I did in the color mixer take the reds down and the yellows and the oranges up, and that helped the trees pop a bit. Then I did the vignette and the stroke, and that was what I did.
Nice.
Thank you.
Number 3, Linda.
That's me. I played with a filter and I couldn't get any of the coloring that I wanted to do. I wanted the focus to be the barn and the colors on the barn. And I wanted to try and get the trees that someone else said earlier. They're very pretty and it's a beautiful shot, but I wanted the barn to stand out.
It looks like a misty morning.
Yeah, it does.
Number 4.
Well, I certainly got it red, didn't I? Looks a little oranger and redder on this screen than on mine.
Sounds like it's time to calibrate your screen. When
I
was
think
the
it
last
is.
time you did it?
Oh, I can't remember. I have done it, but I do need to do it again.
Yeah.
And but I tried to bring out the reds in the barn, and I also thought that the grass in the foreground was too yellowish, and so I tried to bring that down. And then I went and did a neural filter, the fall one in Photoshop. And those were the things main things that I did.
Bob, I think.
Yeah, this is mine. And the color on this, for me also, isn't what I'm seeing, had been seeing at home. Basically, I did a mask of the grass because I thought that was too bright and became dominant. So I was able to darken that and cut down on the green, increase the saturation in the back, and try to keep the roof on the barn white. Also, in a couple of different ways, tried to make it sharper, which brought out the leaves in front of the barn.
Number 6.
This is mine, and I had a hard time getting this to look the way I wanted it to, and I didn't succeed. I spent probably more time on this image than any of the others. I dehazed it first in Lightroom Classic and desaturated it a little, especially the greens. I had masked them, and I cropped it. And then I went into Camera Raw and I selected the barn, increased the texture, the whites, dehazed it, brought up the shadows because I wanted to see what was inside the barn door. I made numerous selections because it didn't completely select the subject. And on all of the selections on the barn and the silo, I worked on, highlights, color, the vibrance, exposure. Then I inverted the masks. I combined them, inverted them to get just the background. And I increased highlights in the background and the contrast. And I decreased some of the shadows so that they'd be a little darker. And I used curves and a fall colors light preset. In Photoshop, I removed the wire. I tweaked the overall brightness and the contrast, Control U. I did a stroke and a slight inner shadow on the bottom and on the right. And then back into Lightroom, I used brushes to dodge the colors on the treetops for some separation of the trees from one another and burn some of the shadows to make the trees stand out. And then I used highlight, saturation, vibrance, and luminance sliders for each of the colors. And it's a little, the barn is more HDR looking than I really wanted it. But by then I was cross-eyed and said, phooey.
Okay. Hopefully Ron will appreciate the time you put into the image. Here's number 7.
Betty, took it into raw and I did details and I cropped it 9:16. Did textures and clarity, dehazed. I did geometry, get it to level up. I did exposure, contrast. I did vibrance, saturation. Then I opened it in Photoshop and did hues and saturation. And that's it.
And finally, Colleen.
This was my attempt at making a postcard out of this image because that's how this struck me. I don't recall it being quite so wildly orange in the background there, but I do know how I achieved that. I went in and did a layer on the trees and tried to pull out the reds and oranges. I didn't expect it to pop quite so much. And then I put some gradient on it as well. So yeah, I'm a little surprised at the way it looks too tonight. But the real thing I wanted to do was to present it in a postcard type format. So that's what I did.
Okay, and I think this might be our final image for tonight. This one I remember I had quite a tussle trying to get rid of some of the background toward the top. And I also had to do some work, I think in the lower left, where there was a fence or a gate or something. And again, you can see what I did with that in the replay. So here is processor number 1.
This is George, and I thought this was a great portrait.
Yeah.
I zeroed in on it, and I brought out some of the textures and some of the highlights, and really couldn't decide how far to crop in on it, and decided on this looking at it. And I see he has a couple of, call them eye boogers there. That gave him a look of, I don't know if it's fearness or character, I guess. It gives him a look of character. And I
Mhm.
really like that. What I really would have liked to do is to say, take that facial tool that's in there, I can't remember which one it is, and try to give him a smile on it, but it wouldn't work. It says it doesn't recognize a face. So I was going to play around with his lips. I couldn't. But yeah, I really like this photo that you took. And I think as a portrait, it really comes out great.
Yeah, yeah, you solved the problem of the bars very nicely.
Oh, that was one of the key features too.
Number 2.
This is mine. I did the texture, the clarity, a little bit of contrast. I used levels to bring out the texture in his fur. Then I did the object selection on the inverse to blur out the background. I didn't do a really good job of selecting all the fur, particularly around his left eye.
That's a real challenge.
Yeah, and I will play with this. I'm still working, just getting into object selection pieces. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, but I got rid of the bars just by blurring out the background.
Mhm.
And then I did the vignette and the stroke, and we're done.
All right.
Yes.
We jump over to number 4.
All right, that's mine. And I did basic edits in Adobe Camera Raw. And then I went over to Photoshop and I mainly stamped out the dark parts above, on his forehead and on the top of his head. And I cropped out the gate, and that's about all I did, I think.
You did well on the top. I remember the challenge there.
It was a challenge. I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time on it.
This should be Bob, I believe.
Yeah, this is mine. I couldn't figure out what to do with it, so I decided to try to make a smiling cow. And this is the first time I've ever used Puppet Warp, but that's what it ended up with.
Cute.
Another tool that you can do that with is the liquefy tool.
Got liquefied.
Correct.
Yeah.
I went one way, I'll try the other next time.
Happy cow.
What I tried was the face, and that didn't work.
Yeah.
I tried various crops
Interesting.
on Chuck and ended up keeping the original. I resized him, and then I selected black and white from the monochrome choices in Photoshop. I used spot healing to remove most of the fencing. I selected the top section of the fence and the fur and pasted it to a separate layer. Worked on removing the fence at the top of the head. I used the patch tool to take out the fence remnants at the top and then tried to blend the pasted layer transformed and fit into the top of the head. I tried cloning the hair fur over the spot, but in hindsight, I can see painting on another layer with a fine brush might have worked a bit better. I did increase the whites and the texture and ended up with a thin stroke and a larger than I normally use vignette to just show off Chuck's face.
Nicely done.
Yeah, like
Thank
it.
you.
Very nice.
Yeah, I like that.
Like a lot.
Number 7.
Betty, I just decided to do a 1x1 crop, and I, like everybody else, did a lot of stamping and cloning to take out the fence, the stock fence
Mm-hmm.
background. Worked around his hair as much as I could to try and keep it, sharpened it. I wish now I kind of brought out his eyes more, but I didn't. And I made sure the texture was up and dehazed it. And that's about it. Put the stroke on. And I took the boogers out of his eyes because that bothered me.
You did.
I did.
And last but not least, this is Colleen's image, and this is her interpretation of it. So, Colleen, why don't you tell us what you did? And if you have any comments for the other processors, now would be a great time to make those.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. I did have good humor with what you did, and I appreciated all of the different interpretations that you did. Because Chuck he's probably in the freezer now, was a barn animal, I didn't have a problem with the stock rail. However, I did soften it with some Gaussian blur on a layer.
Hmm.
And I didn't like the post growing out of the top of his head, so I used some healing brush work to basically get rid of that. And I think it was pretty successful. I
Mhm.
worked on his eyes a little bit in terms of trying to bring out more of them. There was not a lot of light there to work with. It increasing the exposure with radial gradient just made him grainy, so I just could bring him up so far. But I removed the stray hairs that were across his eyes and also took the gumminess out of the eyes. And I liked his little freckles in his nose and in his ears, so I paid attention to those, and of course his shaggy fur. So and kept it in that spring green palette. And that was it. I did a little custom vignette also with the radial gradient.
Very nice. It looks
Not
very good.
radial, linear, because I brought more light from going from the upper left down to the right.
All right. Well, folks, that actually concludes the processing skills night. I call this part 2, the results. Got some thank yous. I'd be remiss if I didn't make right now. First, to all the makers who donated images for this. This wouldn't happen if you weren't so willing to make your images available and to make them available for other people to process. I would like to also thank those same makers for allowing people to process the images. I know some people don't like to have their images touched, but for this exercise, you have to be willing to do that, and I thank you for your willingness. And I also would like to thank everybody for taking the time. It sounds like a generous amount of time that you did over this past week to process each other's images so that we could have this show tonight. I've always said that while we might have a certain look that we make when we take pictures, I've often said that we have a certain look when we process an image. When the maker processes their own image, that to me is the whole enchilada. But to have somebody else process your image really shows that we have a different style with respect to how we process. And this, once again, I really think illustrates that in spades. So again, thank you to everybody who participated, and I look forward to doing this again sometime.